On top of the river bank stood the river god. It must be the river god. His hair was golden, and his face was white. In that white face were pale blue eyes. People had dark hair, dark eyes. It must be the river god. At that moment, the god on top of the river bank looked right at Tien Pao, and then he came plunging down the high bank straight towards Tien Pao and the narrow gangplank that reached from the sampan to the shore. Tien Pao clutched the matting. "Mother," he croaked. He could stand there no longer. He looked wildly about him. He grabbed the sleeping pig. He dived into the sampan, shoved the mats across the opening. He grabbed the sleeping pig. The family pig was the best thing he had. He'd offer the pig to the river god. Oops. He'd offer the pig to the river god. He dashed with the little pig to the far end of the sampan and stood trembling before the river god's own altar. The mats parted. The golden-haired, blue-eyed god stepped into the sampan. Tien Pao's knees quaked under him, but somehow he managed to take a few steps forward. He almost shoved the little pig into the white one's arms. Then he backed away to the altar again, bowing deeply to the god as he backed towards the god's own altar. The strange white one stood in the opening, looking in open-mouthed surprise from the little pig that had been tossed into his arms to the bowing, scraping Tien Pao. Suddenly he threw his head back, and out came a great howling roar of laughter. The god laughed. It was too much for Tien Pao. In his confusion, he desperately dashed past the roaring river god and out of the sampan. The new neighbour woman was still standing outside her sampan. "Please, please, I don't know what the strange white river god wants of me," Tien Pao managed to whisper. The woman too laughed at him. "Stranger child, he is not a god. He is an American airman from the great field for aeroplanes. And he wants you to take him over the river. He picked you, I guess, because you did not shout his ears off like the rest of us." "Oh," Tien Pao said. He felt foolish and small. And he'd given the family pig to the airman, who was only a foreigner. "Oh, but I may not ferry people across the river," Tien Pao told the woman doubtfully. "My father forbade me ever to take the sampan away from the bank." "Oh, but you must take the airman," the woman said. "This is different. You will see. He will pay you much yen. Why, he may even pay you as much as 100 yen, when he should only pay 10. And from what I heard, your father and mother could use the money." 100 yen? Tien Pao looked back at the sampan. 100 yen just for going across the river? Money for food. If his father and mother hadn't found work, why, for 100 yen his father would know he just had to take the sampan away from the bank. Tien Pao hesitated no longer. He pulled down 2 of the long oars. He loosed the rope from the stout stake driven into the bank and pulled in the gangplank. He shoved the sampan into the river. The next moment the river grabbed the sampan. The rain-swollen current was swift and savage. Tien Pao struggled, but from the first it was a losing fight. The nose of the boat swirled around. The sampan swung and raced downstream. Tien Pao fought, but he was weak. He'd had no food all day, and almost none yesterday and the day before. In spite of him, the boat swept on downstream. Inside the sampan, the white stranger must have become alarmed. He came running outside. He looked at the racing river, at Tien Pao struggling with the big oars. He seemed to take in the situation at once, for he hauled down the second set of oars, gave Tien Pao a big encouraging grin, and strode to the front of the sampan with the oars. It went better at once, much better. Soon they began holding their own, and then they were cleaving the current in a long sweeping arc towards the opposite shore. Much sooner than Tien Pao at the back of the boat had expected, the sampan thumped the bank across the river. The soldier came back to place the oars on the roof of mats. He and Tien Pao grinned at each other. The soldier fisted in his pocket, brought up 100-yen note and handed it to Tien Pao, as if it were so much wrapping paper. "It's too much," Tien Pao said in consternation. "Why, you rowed yourself across." "And I should have no pay at all." Of course, the soldier could not understand. He evidently didn't know even a single Chinese word. He just grinned and shook his head when Tien Pao shoved the 100-yen note back at him. Then, without waiting for the gangplank, he took a running jump to the shore. He disappeared in the evening shadows gathering under the high river bank, and he had not taken the little pig. "I'll wait for you," Tien Pao eagerly shouted after him. "I'll take you back, and you won't have to pay 1 yen, not even 1 little yen." Tien Pao peered into the dark again. The river bank loomed black in the gathering night. Still the white soldier did not come. Tien Pao fingered the 100-yen note again for a little reassurance. He was anxious. Night had come. The rain had started again. By now his father and mother with the baby sister must be back from the field for aeroplanes, and there'd be no sampan at the river bank. What if the foreign soldier didn't come back? He couldn't take the sampan across the dark river alone. The saucer lamp before the altar guttered out. The last oil was gone. In the pitch dark of the sampan, Tien Pao felt his way to the altar and prayed to the river god before the dark altar. "God, give me strength, give me strength." He'd have to try it. He didn't dare wait any longer. They'd be waiting for him on the river bank. But wait until they saw the 100-yen note. Then his father wouldn't be so angry. 100 yen. God, give me strength. If only he weren't so hungry. Oh, they'd be scared. The sampan gone. Tien Pao clenched his lips and dug an oar into the mud to free the sampan from the bank. But the river god must have heard him. For before the boat could move away from the bank into the current, a light came plunging down the steep bank. The long beam searched the riverside, found the sampan, picked out Tien Pao at the oars, and then the airman's foreign voice shouted things at him. Tien Pao almost wept for joy. The airman's voice sounded glad too. He jumped on board. Now he hauled down the oars and hurried to the front of the sampan. They pushed off. The sampan swung into the current. In the total dark, the river seemed even more violent and treacherous than when they had first crossed it. The rushing sound of the river was all around them. But the white soldier in the front shouted above it. He kept up his meaningless but encouraging shouts all the way. Now and then his powerful light would flash and search the river, and Tien Pao would see his big, easy, reassuring grin. Tien Pao used every bit of his strength. The boat forged ahead, but anxious as he was, the crossing seemed endless to Tien Pao. Then suddenly they were landing. Tien Pao had not seen the bank at all. The rain beat in his face and blinded and confused him. They were landing, but they were landing clumsily. They crashed so hard into the end sampan of the long row of sampans that the whole boat shuddered. The soldier's light flashed briefly. At that anxious, busy moment, Tien Pao heard a desperate call through the dark rain. "Tien Pao!" It was his mother, calling the piteous question from the top of the high bank. Tien Pao fought the huge clumsy oars to make the boat slide ahead into its proper slot. There was no time to answer. "Tien Pao!" Misery was in his mother's scared call. Tien Pao opened his mouth as if to answer, but his voice strangled in his throat. It took all his wits, all his strength, and all his attention now to keep the boat from being swept downriver again. The soldier shouted something. "Tien Pao!" And now his mother must be plunging straight down the steep, slippery bank. Her voice seemed to come plunging. She was crying. At that moment the soldier in the front dug his oar into the river bottom mud. The sampan shot ahead with such force it slid partly up the mud flat underneath the bank. It lay solid. They had landed. "Mother!" Tien Pao shouted. She must be picking her way down the slippery bank. Maybe she'd fallen in the dark. Now she wasn't answering. Instead, a paper lantern came swinging wildly along the flats below the bank. It was Tien Pao's father. He came towards the sampan in big running strides. He set down the lantern. He shouldered the white soldier aside and stood over Tien Pao. Without a word, he held out his hand for the oars. He turned and took the soldier's 2 oars. "A son of mine who breaks his word I will no longer trust, ever," he said, in stiff, hard words to the soldier. He did not speak to Tien Pao. But then Tien Pao's mother at last was there. By the light of the paper lantern, Tien Pao saw that she was soaked through and through. Even the baby sister on her back was soaked. The coolie hat had not been enough shelter and protection, and his mother's trousers and jacket were covered with mud. She had fallen. Tien Pao stood mute, the 100-yen note squeezed in his hand. The soldier looked at him, looked at Tien Pao's crying mother. Nobody said a word. The soldier fished awkwardly in his pocket. He came up with another 100-yen note. He thrust it into Tien Pao's hand, and he patted Tien Pao on the head so that Tien Pao's mother would see. Tien Pao's mother picked up the paper lantern and went into the sampan. The soldier, with a helpless shrug and a look at Tien Pao, turned, and then he was gone in the night. Tien Pao hurried after his mother. Inside the sampan, Tien Pao's mother was unstrapping the baby sister. But when she looked at the soaked baby, her face worked. She stripped the wet clothes off the baby, held her out to Tien Pao to hold, while she rummaged in a chest under the bench for something dry. With his mother kneeling before the chest, her back to him, it was easier to explain. 100 yen for taking the foreign airman across, and 100 yen for taking him back, Tien Pao said loudly to make it sound as impressive as possible. And mother, the neighbour woman said I had to take him across, and I thought, suppose you and father hadn't found work, and there I'd have 200 yen. His mother said nothing. Tien Pao refused to be silenced by her silence. 200 yen for a little trip across and back, he said stubbornly. His mother took the baby from him and wrapped it in a square of dry cloth. Sit down with her and turn your back while I take off these drenched clothes. Over the sleeping baby sister, Tien Pao earnestly explained everything all over again to his mother. Then before he knew it, he was blurting out that he had been so anxious about them there across the river, he'd almost started back alone. Tien Pao's mother stopped tugging at her wet jacket to sit down heavily at that announcement. She began to cry. Oh, Tien Pao, we didn't know what to do, where to go. We couldn't go across. Even the footbridge is under. The river has risen so high with the rain, even the footbridge was under. All we could hear was the river. She caught a deep breath. Your father had gone to see if one of these river people would take him across. Even they hesitated to cross in the dark, and they're river people. But you were going to cross alone. Her voice sounded strangled. Your father borrowed a lantern, she went on in a calmer voice. He was in a state to seize one of these sampans and go after you. And then on top of the bank I heard the strange foreign voice from the river. I called out, but you didn't answer. Oh, Tien Pao. And if the foreigner hadn't come back, you'd have tried to cross alone. It looks like my father is terribly angry, Tien Pao said solemnly to take her mind off the river dangers. He looked at the 200 yen notes squeezed in his hot, damp hand. Didn't he have reasons? His mother burst out. He worked all day swinging a heavy hammer and nothing to eat all day. Then at the end of the long hard day, we found we would not even get 1 single yen. The Americans do not pay until the end of a week. Then the long empty walk home in the rain, and then no sampan at the bank, and the river roaring in the dark. She suddenly buttoned her jacket again. She reached out and took the yen notes from Tien Pao's hand. She looked at them. 200 yen, she said softly. It certainly turned out well. Why, I don't know. It must be the river god is still protecting the family of Tien. But if we're careful, we can last out the week until the Americans pay. She became thoughtful. Supper tonight, food, charcoal for the stove, oil for the lamp, rice to grind for your baby sister. She jumped up. Your father's at one of the new neighbours arranging with him to keep our oars on his sampan. He will not trust you any more. I'm going to him at once. Tired as he is and hungry, He must get food and oil and charcoal. Why, then we can even dry our clothes. Maybe we can even afford a bit of tobacco for him. Oh, he'll go when he sees the 200 yen. Everything will suddenly seem so much better. She laughed a little laugh and hurried out of the sampan. Tian Pao sighed and sat back with the baby sister. It had gone much better than he'd expected. Of course, there was still his father to face, but he felt immensely relieved. He hugged the baby. "Beauty of the Republic," he said fondly over and over. "Beauty of the Republic." His mother came back into the sampan. "Your father's gone after food. You should have seen his big strides, especially when he heard me think aloud that maybe we could afford a bit of tobacco." She sounded almost gay. But then suddenly she was kneeling before Tian Pao, looking deep into his eyes. "Tian Pao, promise me you'll never take the sampan away from the bank again, not for anything or anybody." Tian Pao looked at her doubtfully. "But mother, if the airman should come again?" She shook her head. "Not for 200 yen. No, not for 200,000 yen. Could I go through it again." "Tian Pao, have you considered, what if you should try to cross the river and the river should take you?" "The wonderful airman would help me row again," Tian Pao said sturdily. "Tian Pao, do you know where the river would take you?" his mother said very slowly. "Suppose you risked it again. Suppose the terrible river current should wrench just one oar away. Your wonderful river god airman has no experience with sampans. Tian Pao, do you know what would happen if the river took you and that American airman? Where it would take you? Back where we came from. Back to the Japanese. Do you know what would happen to your helpless airman? The Japanese would torture him. He is an airman. They would drive bamboo splinters under his tender nails until he told all about this great new field for aeroplanes we are building here at Henyang. And when he had told, they would kill him." Tian Pao went pale. He stared at his mother. His lips moved but could make no sound. He shoved his fingers under him, sat on them. It was as if the torture pains were stabbing up under his fingernails, so real it seemed. "Mother," he whispered with difficulty, never will I take the sampan away from the bank again." His mother searched his face. "Then it is well," she said simply. "And if you'll tell your father that when he comes with the food, all will be well again." And I think there we'll take another little break, because I'm sure there are great adventures to come. And we've still got to worry about those ducklings. Okay.